Welcome, everyone. My name is Matt Winefield, and we are currently producing the inaugural Brownfield Braintrust podcast. Now, for those who don't know, a brownfield is a property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which is complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. There are over 500,000 brownfields in the U.S. These properties may contain gas stations, dry cleaners, plating shops, refineries, tank farms, or anything industrial manufacturing you can imagine. A brownfield is incredibly difficult to remediate, and buyers cannot typically receive debt financing to acquire them. This Brownfields Braintrust podcast is a forum to solve some of the vexing problems associated with transforming environmentally blighted sites into beneficial uses. We will tackle regulatory, financial, and technical nuances. And I'm delighted for our first podcast to have with me Ignacio Dayrit, Director of Programs for the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Tell us about yourself, Ignacio.
Well, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're from. And thank you, Matt, for making me the inaugural. So that's a kind of a tall order, but again, we're up to the task. We do brownfields, so we can do almost anything else. So about myself, well, I'm an immigrant from the Philippines, 6 of 8 kids. So we're always scrambling for attention and doing stuff, and there's hardly enough to go around. So I grew up being sustainable. I had to make do. And everything I did was really, you try to get the most of what you have. So we were, at a very young age, we were sustainable already. We were very efficient in what we had, the attention we got, any money or allowance we got. So that was the early part of my life. I went to architecture school, and then I worked as an urban planner and an architect. And I ended up really working with a lot of municipalities. Even then, many, many years ago, I was helping cities redevelop their towns, helping them with projects. Thereafter, I went to grad school here in the States, and I ended up staying. My first job was in the city of Oakland. I was exposed to a lot of affordable housing.
But you're selling yourself short. You went to grad school at Berkeley, right?
Right. Yes,
Berkeley. That's a tall order, sir.
But anyway, so going back, I went to Berkeley Planning School. Ended up, I worked for the city of Oakland for a while, so I learned a lot about housing and a lot of politics. Politics in California and Oakland are very different from where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And then I ended up in Emeryville, California, where, again, a lot of brownfields. We didn't know there were brownfields then. It wasn't even a term yet.
What was the predominant industry in Emeryville?
Well, Emeryville is a very small city. It's just a bit over 1 square mile. It's on the margin of San Francisco Bay. Mm-hmm. So there were a lot of illegal dumps. There were a lot of industry. So actually, they had cars manufactured in Emeryville.
Thank you.
They had pesticide plants. They had canneries. They had up to 20,000 people working there in that small area. And they had a small community, resident community, but it was thriving. It was really quite, it really left quite a legacy of contamination. Everywhere you looked, everywhere you poked, there was something to be found. And so I got my feet really dirty with dirty sites. And so that's how I guess I became, that's how I'm in front of you now talking about brownfields, because for us, it was just something we did. And something we just dealt with directly. And being in a small city where politics isn't such a big stumbling block, and next to cities like Oakland, Berkeley, and San Francisco, where politics and process are very difficult, we're fortunate that we really got a lot of things done in Emeryville.
And then from Emeryville, you went to the Center for Creative Land Recycling, your
Yes.
current home?
Yes. 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I joined Seaclear, the Center for Creative Land Recycling. But actually, prior to joining Seaclear, I had already been helping out with Seaclear. Seaclear started in 1997, and I didn't leave Emeryville since until 2009. So even during those 12 years, I was kind of in and out of Seaclear, helping out, providing, giving Seaclear feedback of what cities deal with. And even at that time, we were working with the Department of Toxic Substances Control and other stakeholders on how to make brownfields work. And Seaclear itself was a project at that time of the Trust for Public Land.
Now, backing up a bit, what does Seaclear do? It's a very unique organization, one of the most unique I've ever seen.
Okay, so Seaclear is a nonprofit. It actually started out as the center It started out as the California Center for Land Recycling.
Mm-hmm.
It was a project of the Trust for Public Lands because TPL realized that in order to save and preserve open space, you need to do infill. And in order to do infill, there are a lot of contaminated lands.
Absolutely.
So basically, Seaclear helps cities, communities, nonprofits, developers, practically anyone recycle land. And when I say, and you had mentioned a term brownfields and you had a number there, you said over 500,000. Well, in reality, brownfields in itself, you could bring up the definition of the perception of contamination. But in terms of process and real estate process, any site that is under a land transaction or any site that is proposed for development or digging, if you're doing construction, you essentially have to do a phase 1 and or a phase 2.
Yes.
And basically in California or anywhere in the United States, you can use state and federal funding assistance to do phase 1s and phase 2s. So basically, any site you do digging in or purchase can use brownfields funds. So that $500,000 sites really becomes practically any site in the country.
Mm-hmm. And then, what kind of challenges do you see for cities and communities to transform some of these sites? I know that's a very open-ended question, but why do cities call you? Why do communities call you?
Well, the first thing they call about is money.
Okay.
Sometimes they have a project. Many times they have a project, or they have a developer who wants to look at a project, or they have a neighborhood or a corridor that's really they see is run down. And they just happen to hear about what we do. And so typically what we do is, they come to us for money or for ideas in where to go next.
So do you write them a check or do you?
Well, we don't have checks, unfortunately, but we know where to send them to get the checks.
Okay.
So the Seaclear, part of our funding comes from the Environmental Protection Agency. We have a grant from the EPA to provide free technical assistance to eligible entities, which are basically nonprofits, cities, and states, and their partners. So primarily public agencies and nonprofits. And with that money, we help cities get EPA grants or get free technical assistance so they can do phase 1s and phase 2s. And actually, what's more important really is brownfields is really not about cleaning up sites. The Superfund project is what's about cleaning up sites.
Okay.
Brownfields is really about recycling and reusing sites for some economic or community benefit.
You bring up a couple very important terms that are sometimes confused. Maybe tell the listeners the difference between Superfund and Brownfield. I get this all the time.
All right. So Superfund sites are those sites where that are typically they're so contaminated that the responsible party can no longer cover the cost of cleaning it up, and the state and the federal government realize that and basically say, okay, we can't do this through the market process. We can't clean this up. There just aren't enough resources to clean it up. We are going to put it on a list which the federal government will eventually clean up if they ever come up with the money.
Right.
And so Superfund basically is that fund. And the challenge of that is that Superfund has been underfunded for many, many years. Now that's federal policy, that's politics. And so we have no control over that. But basically, there are a whole bunch of these very, very dirty sites that aren't going to get cleaned up anytime soon. The brownfields, on the other hand, typically have, they could have responsible parties who are able to pay for cleanup, or they might be what are called orphan sites, or something in between. And but these aren't quite so dirty that they're not imminent. There's not imminent danger to public health and the environment from the toxics on that site.
Generally speaking, Superfund sites are a lot larger. Think landfills, think big industrial plants.
Right. Yes. You think spewing. Think screaming contamination. Brownfields contamination doesn't really scream at you. They're just typically they do affect the neighborhood because they're probably not fully utilized. They could be vacant or partially vacant. They're typically abandoned. And again, you mentioned dry cleaners, gasoline stations. There are some really old buildings that they have hazardous building materials. So
sure,
the ground might not be contaminated, but the building might be. These are considered brownfields also. So a lot of central cities and small towns everywhere, main streets, downtowns, you name it. There's a brownfield on every corner.
Does Seaclear work nationally, or do you focus more on West Coast? Or
well, yes. So that's a two-part answer. Our EPA grant specifically focuses on EPA regions 2, 9, and 10, which is basically the coasts.
I see.
We are in the New York, New Jersey area, and we are in the West Coast. So that's Alaska all the way down diagonally to Arizona.
I see. That's quite a broad brush.
Yeah, we have Puerto Rico and we have Hawaii, Guam, and Marianas Islands.
Wonderful. Tell me about some of your contracts, maybe a case study or how you've transformed a site or helped someone out after they've called.
Okay, so something about Seaclear is that we get involved very early in the process.
When people have a conceptual thought, you help them mold that lump of clay into something.
Right, and we connect them to the people who make the groundbreaking happen, who make the designs and bring in the architects and the planners, and they bring in the developers, and then they are there with the ribbon cutting. Seaclear comes in way before that. Mm-hmm. I have projects that I worked on in Emeryville where I had been working on in the 2000s and are just being completed right now. 20 years in the making.
Well, what took you so long? For gosh sakes.
It's the economy, stupid.
Oh, okay. All right. I love it.
Right. Well, it's not just the economy, but everything has to be in the right place. But so, for instance, here's a project for an example of a brownfield project. I won't say it's Seaclear because it's been happening for so long now. But let's go to Southern California because that's where you're from. If you look at if you're in Southern California and you've heard of Taylor Yard, this is an abandoned rail yard on the LA River, that has been for years been the subject of development focus.
Is this the one just south of downtown? Oh.
I think it's actually north of downtown.
Okay.
And so over the years, not just the city of LA, but many developers have been involved on Taylor Yard. So it's probably been sliced and diced for many years. Over the past 10 years, I would say, Seaclear has helped developers get infrastructure funding for the houses that are actually now up there, have been constructed. We are also helping the city of LA. We've actually helped the city of LA get several grants to build a riverfront park on Taylor Yard. And we are working with so many other nonprofits who want to put parks and other enterprises up and down the LA river, including Taylor Yard. So that's one kind of sort of a success story in the making. In Northern California, if you've ever been on the train from anywhere, east of California, and you buy a ticket into to San Francisco, you actually get off you get off at the Emeryville Amtrak station.
Okay.
That was a brownfield.
Ah.
Many years ago, there was a humongous tank farm there, and there was also a PCB encapsulated dump there. In the 80s, the Regional Water Quality Control Board issued a cease and desist order to the owners because they had PCB contaminated water sloshing the whole neighborhood. Now, you look at that neighborhood now, in addition to an Amtrak station,
yes,
you have now, there's 200 units of townhouses built 15 years ago, really.
Yes.
On that former tank farm, you have 5 or 6 buildings, biotech, clean tech, on 4 different buildings all around there. And there is a 12, 13-story tower which sits on that PCB encapsulated site.
And this all started with some federal and state grants to look at some of the...
Well, all it started was, it starts with a little grant funding from the EPA and some regulatory assistance from both state agencies, DTSC and the regional board, and with the responsible parties. So the tank farm owner came to the table and saw that this was a good thing to do. There was an economic benefit. And they came to the table, and the developer was very able to negotiate that. And that huge tower, we're talking about a Fortune 50 company,
right? That
little old city had to negotiate with, and was able to bring to the table to actually, redevelop the site. Now, it took a lot of help from the EPA.
Yes.
So this is all hands on deck. You had the EPA, you had the regional board, you got the Department of Toxic Substances Control, you had a very good developer, you had a EPA funds that were used for site assessments and for a revolving loan fund. We used the EPA revolving loan fund to fund some infrastructure that actually served as a cleanup for the site.
I see.
So this is where everything comes together. It takes, as I said, this deal started in the 2000s.
Yes.
But since then, and we're not talking about a very huge site. This is about 15, 20 acres.
My goodness.
But it's brought all these jobs and economic development to a tiny city that, it's really, it really comes under the radar, but all the effort behind it, is really buried under all the toxics that were encapsulated along with the cleanups.
It sounds like a project to be proud of, for certainly. And then it sounds like Seaclear is sort of the ombudsman and just the catalyst, gets a lot of these other parties going that would not otherwise talk to one another.
Yes, we have to. Well, we see every side of the equation, and it really varies by community. Mm-hmm. What works in one community doesn't work in another community. There are many controversial brownfield projects going on even right now, and there's a lot of give and take. It's very difficult to have a perfect project at the time you do a deal. At the time, most of these Emeryville projects, and any project we go to really, there's a whole lot of give and take. And many people leave the bargaining table with some grudges and not exactly happy. And really, you don't see this success for 10, 15, 20 years because who knows what happens at all this time. I mean, we didn't know when I was in Emeryville whether these projects would be successful or not. It's still, the proof is still the pudding's still a way down the road. But you can tell right now from where Emeryville is, from where it was now, from when it was then, if we had not negotiated in good faith and or stuck our stakes in the mud and not negotiate or budge, it would still be a lot of brownfields. But a lot of cities are more complicated than that, and their challenges to getting to yes are much more difficult.
I understand. So, in addition to funding and putting together all these disparate parties, you do a lot of training and conferences, don't you?
Oh, yes. So both live and remote. Right. When COVID happened, we actually pivoted immediately to a lot of virtual conferences. We organized the Hawaii Brownfields conference in 3 weeks, which is lightning speed. It usually takes a couple of months.
Yes, it is.
We did the California Land Recycling Conference, and you can view both online if you want to.
What is your website, sir? If I recall correctly, is cclr.org, correct?
Yes.
All righty. Well,
and we also have a YouTube channel. It's CCLR TV.
CCLR TV.
Yes, and that's
on the. What kind of things will people see on your YouTube channel?
What will they see? Well, they'll actually see some recordings of webinars.
Okay.
And our webinars touch on a whole bunch of things. We talk science. We talk regulatory programs. We talk success stories, how developers think, how to apply and compete for EPA grants. It runs the gamut. And we have a new video on health fields and a video on the successes and the ongoing story at West Sacramento and of Emeryville too. So there's one there where I'm actually walking you folks around Emeryville and some of the sites we developed. And that tower and that Amtrak station I mentioned are on that video.
Well, I hope you were wearing a mask, sir. And
well, the video was taken before COVID.
Okay. Pre-COVID, post-COVID. Well, anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, if you're in California and you need money, come to Seaclear. DTSC, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, actually has some revolving loans fund money. If you want to borrow money for cleanups, keep in touch with Seaclear because we're always cooking something up, and again, we work the entire West Coast. So if you have projects up and down the coast, then we're happy to help.
Just Center for Creative Land Recycling and Ignacio Dayrit, thank you very much. It's a wonderful resource for people with brownfields challenges. All righty, we have finished our first inaugural podcast, and this is extremely exciting. And my only remaining question for you is, should I call it the Winefield Brownfield Braintrust podcast? I think that's too much of a tongue twister.
Why do you call it the Winefields?
The Winefield Brownfield? The Winefields, we could have so much fun with that. All righty.